Funding Rural. I'm Erin Borla, trustee and executive director of the Roundhouse Foundation in Sisters, Oregon. I first met Josh Davis when he was on a visit to Central Oregon a few years back, and I've bumped into him at professional meetings since then. But I had never had the chance to sit down with him and hear his personal backstory, his journey into philanthropy, and I'm so glad I get to share it with you today. Josh is Mississippi born and raised. He began his career in the nonprofit world by working for the Delta Health Alliance, which is a nonprofit that works to improve access to health care and education in the Mississippi Delta. He then made the shift into the philanthropic world and now serves as the Vice President of Policy and Partnerships at StriveTogether. He's leading national efforts to build civic infrastructure and influence public policy that puts more young people on a path to economic mobility. I asked him about his journey from rural Mississippi to working at the national level.
I'll tell you precisely when I knew I was going to leave Mississippi and take up some opportunity. In 2017, I was selected as one of 24 people across the country to participate in a fellowship. At the time, it was called the Presidio Institute Fellowship, based out of the Presidio Institute in San Francisco. And the basis of this fellowship was they were selecting people from across America that were focusing on large-scale complex issues and being very intentional about the diversity across sectors. And so this cohort for the fellowship that was in its fourth year at the time, we had higher ed, nonprofit, military, government. It was a really eclectic group of people. The structure was that we spent a year together learning about some of the capacities and competencies that help to support leadership. So Strength Finders was a strong focus of understanding what our strengths were and thinking about how to lean into those and our roles and our systems, and that was foundational. So we spent a week together in San Francisco in April, then a week together in Washington, D.C. in the summer, and a week in New York. It was our week together in D.C. when we had visited with the Office of Management and Budget. We had done a couple Smithsonian tours, and then we were joined by Cornel West. But he was the president of the NAACP at the time. Mm-hmm. And we were having this really intimate conversation as he joined us as a group. There's 24 of us, maybe 6 faculty. And the entire time that he was talking, it felt like 80% of the time he was speaking directly to me. His eyes just kept finding their way to be trained and fixed on me in the audience. And as he closed, he said to us as a group, "Do not underestimate your power and do not allow this moment of participation to bypass you." And Erin, it was as if something just opened up that allowed me to, in a very cerebral and in a very sort of spirit fashion, to acknowledge one thing for sure, that I was not just the poor Black kid from Mississippi in another learning environment, just taking information. I was like, I have a lot to give. My history and my place that I come from, a poor Black child from the South, specifically Mississippi, working in the Delta, the world has trained me to think and believe that I do not have a body of knowledge to offer back to the world, that I'm in a position where I will always look to those that are part of large institutions, of large population centers, of a certain class to teach me. In that moment, I just lost all of that. And I realized that I actually have enough experience and potential to position myself to give back and not just receive. And before I left DC, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I was going to leave Mississippi because I could support my state in a national perspective and a national role, but also begin to contribute to this just side of our country that has empathy and an appetite for doing something different than what we have been doing in the masses.
Talk about that confidence building process. And, I think there's a real interest in philanthropy to fund programs that can leverage additional support. And, we always want to say, oh, our dollars leverage these other things. Like how do you tell that story
Yeah.
in a way that allows those leverage points?
Well, you're probably going to laugh again, but it's for me, it's kind of my Mississippi simple. Uh, it's in my Mississippi simple. Nobody else calls it this, but I understand, and people from Mississippi understand, and people that are not from Mississippi but are from small town America, and then specifically in the South, across the arc of history, the stereotypes that are placed upon us, and some of them we earn, but some of the stereotypes that are placed upon us in how we show up, how we communicate, how thoughtful we are, and how articulate we are in communicating a concept, an idea, and an ask. I use those to my advantage because I frequently use common language when I know common language is the only thing that's necessary to have an idea understood. And so, what that kind of looks like is, where do we find a common value or a common goal that both parties or all parties can say, yeah, I agree with that? And moving the conversation from that agreement into some of the factors that impact that, and asking for conversation and a fuller perspective from another individual or all parties about why are conditions not adding up to the type of goal, the type of values that we want to see exemplified in the world. And the thread from those conditions allows for a conversation to be had in, how do you measure, what do you look to know whether or not these conditions are proving, so that you can actually take action. In order to act upon these conditions, it's critical to understand your efficacy, because resources are required: money, time, commitment. There's an opportunity cost to something that you're not doing by taking action on a certain condition. And so when we're able to move from conditions to the measurements of those conditions, that's where science, evidence, the history of what has worked or hasn't worked can take shape in a conversation that allows for a little less subjectivity and a little more objectivity, because some things have to be true when it comes to analyzing a condition, what has been the state of that condition over time. And so if I can get those sort of ingredients, what is a baseline of agreement about what we would like to see in the world? What do we think are the conditions that create this? And what's the baseline of truth around the measurement of those conditions? I feel like that is kind of the science that allows for me and allows for StriveTogether as a convener of national conversations, a convener of state conversations, a convener of local conversations around conditions. That sort of 1, 2, 3 list of ingredients allow for people to then assess what's their appetite for taking action on those measurements.
You've often referred to education as the biggest equalizer in life. Talk about that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Oxford, Mississippi, which is a small college town. It's where the University of Mississippi is. It's probably in 1977 when my family moved there. It's probably a community of no larger than 20,000 people, with a university that was probably around 12,000 people as well. Now, I grew up in a rural, really large Black community called West Spring Hill. And our household was absolutely below the poverty line. We were the working poor. Both mom and dad worked. And when I was in the first grade, at the end of the year, I was selected to take the IQ assessment, the advanced assessment for students that could enter into the gifted program. And so in the summer between my first grade and second grade, I took this assessment. I was placed in the enrichment program, which was a smaller contained group of students. There were probably 8 of us at the time. It's about 1981, 82. And we took core classes with enrichment infused curriculums. And I was in these small contained classes from second grade through 8th grade. So what that did for me, one of the things that it did is it sort of shaped this dual development in Mississippi of living in a Black community and poor, but establishing incredible friendships, some that are lifelong. In fact, when I was in Oregon, it was the first time I got to see one of my best friends, Aaron Moorhead, who is in the state. And we were in this class together in second grade. But while I was identified as academically gifted and placed in this position where I had access to students and their families that did things like rock rappelling and water skiing, and they went to museums and they traveled to Memphis to go to the mall. They had these normal experiences for their community and their families that gave me access to the same type of social benefits. But then I went back home during the school week and in my community where I didn't quite really fit into either one of these with the exact congruency. More importantly, my inclusion in this contained group, it changed the way that people saw me. And in Mississippi in the 80s, in my community at that time, not only did Black people see me differently, but the white people in my community saw me differently. And because of that, they allowed the inflow of resources to me and my family. They saw me different than many and most of the other children in my neighborhood. So take note, I'm not saying I'm different, but people saw me as different from the Black community from which I came, both Black and white. But the white people in my community had access, privilege, and power. And because of my proximity to them, I was also allowed access to many of the things that come along with that. And this took place because of an academic and educational intervention in my life. And so this turning point allowed for me to take full advantage of these extracurricular, academic, and social benefits in the school, on the college campus, in the community and in the state. And it transformed the trajectory of what my life could have been if people had not seen me as different based on academic acumen.
How, as adults in this space and working on big, sweeping issues, do we provide that support in a way to help our young people feel seen enough that they know that they have that support? I mean, I think that's folks' goal in general, right? Is we want young people to be successful.
Yeah.
And that first step is being seen.
And Aaron, I think that there's the individual and then the systemic way of working towards this objective of each child being able to be seen. I think that individuals' abilities and desire, their appetite, their capacity to do so is it's like taking a chance. You hope that people are. And one of the tenets of the Strive Together national approach that I think is so important is this focus on the systems that and the environments that govern our country, our state, our localities are so important to provide incentives and compliance so that the institutions and the entities that respond to those systems and are accountable to those systems are creating the environment for
Mhm.
individuals to act in role, not necessarily their person and how they show up as a person, but in their role, because children move through systems.
So, what's philanthropy's role in ensuring that those systems are working as best as they can?
Philanthropy has a critical role in incentivizing, in testing, in taking risk, where those learnings and those proof points can be considered for adoption in the other sectors that make a community healthy or unhealthy. I think that philanthropy has the ability to catalyze how the private sector, our government, how the nonprofit sector, the education, criminal justice, housing sector, how all of these sectors and systems that impact the quality of life for children and families. I think that philanthropy has a very important role to play in allowing for what has emerging potential to be scaled, for unrecognized or undeveloped potential to become emerging, and to serve as sources to help sort of define and crystallize what a long-term commitment to an approach should be by government. So I also think philanthropy has, and I've been a recipient of this, they have a strong, strong ability to foster leaders that may not be conscious of their leadership abilities. I think that because philanthropy was a part of my participation in the Presidio Institute Fellowship, were it not for that, I may not have been able to participate and to be, called
Yeah.
or awakened to what I believed in 2017 I had to offer. And so I think leadership development, personal development is the other side of philanthropy's role, because they can impact systems of government, systems of civic engagement, systems of many different sectors that impact quality of life. And then they also have the ability to help shape the people that make up these systems. And they do both.
Mm-hmm. It's back to being seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think that's something that, we certainly look at here when we're out in community of like, who are the quiet leaders that are
Mm-hmm.
showing up that maybe don't know their power and influence that they actually have. The diamond in the rough folks that the community looks to, or they show up when they know, so and so is going to be at the table. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that's such an interesting space for philanthropy to be in because you see who's moving quietly and making things happen. When you work at a national scale, how are you seeing rural communities show up or communities that maybe have been not invested in? Are they given a space at the table? How do they access that space?
So, at a national scale, quite honestly, in my experience, it depends on a lot about the outcomes of the presidential election and of the congressional elections, both during the midterms and in presidential election years. Um, I think a fairly general perception that in the last couple of decades, during this moment of time, that rural communities are seen as benefiting with respect to what they hope to be able to accomplish in their communities by being tethered and connected more closely to a more conservative, a more Republican national representation in government. The states, I think, have very, very varying forms and are more fluid. But if you're asking me my experience, I'm sort of holding this time frame from 2010 to 2015 over the last 15 years as I've been a part of engaging with the federal government, engaging with Congress, and this just seems to be the analysis that I would come up with.
So as we close out, as you look back, I mean, as this has been a reflective experience over your path from a rural kid growing up in Mississippi to working within an organization in the Delta to now this national network where you're influencing policy, what are you most excited about? What's given you hope?
What gives me hope is much more personal. It's my children. This is something that I didn't actually plan on sharing, but I it will make sense as to why I say my children. So my last name is Davis, and my mom and dad are both from the famous Civil War battle city of Vicksburg, Mississippi, in the lower part of the Delta. And if I was standing next to you, I would open up the Google Maps app and I would bring up the Mississippi River and then fix Vicksburg in the center. And I would maximize the map a tad bit more so that you could see just across the Mississippi River, there is a piece of land called Davis Island. And Mother's Day of 2022, I was in Vicksburg with my family and I was trying to understand where we were in the town and looking at the streets. And as I was playing with the map, I discovered Davis Island. And I thought that is really strange because I'd heard from my father's side that our family came off of Jefferson Davis's plantation. And so that weekend, I spent I spent a lot of time phoning and going to sit with members of my father's family and my mother's family. And what I discovered was that on my mother's side of the family, my great, great, great grandfather, one of them, his name was Shelby Elsie. And on my father's side, a great, great, great grandfather whose name was Horace Davis, both came off of Davis Island. And in fact, Davis Island was a plantation that was shared by Jefferson Davis and his brother. And I have been processing that since that discovery. My family knew, but it was kind of this thing that we didn't talk about, which is, you're not going to understand that. But to know that at least two of my family members are able to be identified from a very specific plantation, and to know that that plantation was owned by the president of the Confederacy, and the navigation of my family members over multiple generations to allow for me to be born in Mississippi, be raised in Mississippi, and grow up to have three daughters whose trajectory in life looks nothing like mine did at their age, and quite possibly few others in my family, tracing their blood back to what I know now about at least two of my members coming from Davis Island in that plantation gives me hope.
I'm reflecting on your story and appreciate you sharing. I think those finding we all want our kids to be successful and to learn from where we've come from, and I so appreciate that you share that and value that is a vision that you see and is what is giving you hope today. And I see that carried through your work in the other communities that you work with, that you take your own history, your own experience, and give people power to share theirs.
Well, I hope so.
That's how we change the world, right?
Yeah. One person at a time.
That's right. When we reflect on who we are and where we've come from and the power that those memories and people held and continue to hold, and the power that they give us to move forward.
Yeah. Aaron, thank you for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure to revisit some of the most important parts of my life, and to have you interested in how my personal story shows up in America.
Acknowledging history and where we've come from is so important. It meant the world to me that Josh chose to share his family history, particularly that of the enslavement of his family members. And he shared it in such a way it really brought home for me why he works so hard to enable all young people in this country to access better futures. Philanthropy and the nonprofit world need people with diverse backgrounds to shape how we do this work. When someone like Josh brings his personal journey as a Black kid growing up below the poverty line in Mississippi, he's bringing a lived experience that's so critical to this work, to do better in both rural and urban communities. It starts with listening and understanding, knowing where we've come from, especially between folks who come from different backgrounds. Head over to fundingrural.com where you can read more about Josh and StriveTogether. Thank you so much for joining us.